Today, we're tackling something that is literally on everyone's mind. But honestly, it's really explained with any real practical depth. We're getting into a masterclass on economic resilience. Now, I know economic resilience sounds like dry corporate jargon, right? Right up until you check your bank account after a trip to the grocery store, right? So our goal today is simple but absolutely crucial. We're going to arm you with actionable, data-backed strategies to protect your livelihood, your career, and your company from total economic chaos. Let's get right to it.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you or I hear the word recession, our brains usually jump straight to those abstract, high-level macroeconomic fears, The stock market charts plummeting, interest rate hikes, national debt. But what does a recession actually feel like for everyday workers and managers?
Well, to really get it, we need to look at two very different definitions. On one hand, you have the sterile textbook definition, 2 consecutive quarters of GDP decline, which is, pretty dry. It's academic. But then, on the other hand, you have the psychosocial definition. This is the reality on the ground. We're talking shrinking household income, this heavy, suffocating blanket of uncertainty, and just deep, pervasive anxiety about the future. And hey, if you've been feeling that anxiety lately, it is completely valid, and it's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Don't worry, we're actively building towards some highly practical, empowering advice. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we're going beyond the GDP drop. Then we'll look at the Turkish stress test. After that, we'll break down mistakes driven by panic, move into recession-proofing your career, and wrap up with leading through the downturn.
All right, starting off with Section 1, Beyond the GDP drop, looking at the true human cost.
You see, recessions don't just mess with financial markets. They fundamentally reshape our psychological well-being. The true impact hits incredibly close to home. It's that shock of seeing your weekly grocery bills suddenly double while economists are on the evening news calmly discussing a 2% GDP drop. We're talking about shrinking purchasing power. Your paycheck just doesn't stretch like it used to. We're seeing way more competition for fewer jobs, companies putting off their investments, and a really sharp spike in cost-cutting and layoffs. But, and here's a massive takeaway from the research, the fear of an economic slump all by itself can trigger behavioral changes, like hoarding cash or freezing all hiring, that actually make the economic contraction worse. The fear literally becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Crazy, right?
So how do we break that cycle of panic? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the Turkish stress test, and some serious lessons from the front lines.
To figure this out, we're looking at Turkey's highly volatile economy as our ultimate testing ground, given its intense history of currency swings and super high inflation. Now, what's really interesting about this number here is that 628 represents the combined years of professional experience of the 43 Turkish experts, entrepreneurs, executives, managers who were interviewed for the study we're digging into today. So we aren't just talking theory here. This is over 6 centuries of hard-won, in-the-trenches experience dealing with wild market swings. When researchers surveyed these experts, 5 core themes emerged that basically show a recession as a giant domino effect. It kicks off with household-level pressure, so the rising cost of housing and groceries. That bleeds directly into labor market uncertainty, which breeds this intense fear of losing your job. Naturally, that triggers these psychosocial effects, anxiety about the future, completely losing your motivation. Then, to survive, people fall back on coping strategies by massively restricting what they spend. And finally, the last domino falls, policy expectations, where citizens start demanding government intervention on inflation. It is a full chain reaction, starting right there in your local grocery store and ending up shaping national policy. So, what happens when that domino effect really starts to speed up? Let's get into Section 3, Mistakes Driven by Panic. Just listen to this raw, verbatim quote from one of the folks in the Turkish survey. They said, "Short-sighted moves made without considering the future, merely to get through the day, are deeply concerning." That right there, that captures the exact moment when actual strategic thinking completely collapses into just reactive day-to-day survival mode. And let me tell you, it is incredibly destructive to the long-term health of any organization. Get this. A staggering 95% of the respondents in this study had personally lived through a recession. And one of the biggest traps they saw over and over, employees trying to literally outrun the bad economy by overworking themselves to the absolute bone, purely out of panic. And this brilliantly illustrates the real human cost of that panic. Another respondent pointed out they take on a second job and become psychologically exhausted. It's just brutal. The anxiety of a recession connects directly to severe employee burnout. And think about it, when your workforce is completely burned out, motivation just evaporates. That actually makes the whole organization way more vulnerable to the economic hit. So we absolutely have to learn the difference between reacting and responding. Look at the stark contrast here. Panic reactions, that's slashing jobs just to save a quick buck today, or individuals taking on terrible debt just to keep up their lifestyle, or hastily panic-quitting a job out of fear. But strategic resilience, that is deliberate. That looks like upskilling, bringing in flexible work hours to actually save jobs, and cross-training your teams so they become incredibly versatile. It's a totally different mindset. Which leads us perfectly into the most empowering part of this whole explainer, Section 4, Recession-proofing your career. It is time to take back some control. First up, where are the safest harbors? Historically resilient industries all share one massive thing in common. They meet basic, non-discretionary needs for society. We're talking healthcare and medical tourism, energy and utility workers, the people literally keeping the lights on, cybersecurity and IT pros protecting our data, public safety and accounting. These sectors stay remarkably rock solid, even when everybody's extra spending money totally dries up.
But what should you actually do when the job market tightens up, no matter what industry you're in? Well, the data outlines 4 highly proactive steps. Step 1, boost that digital literacy. Master the AI tools and data skills that are completely transforming your field right now. Step 2, diversify your skills. You want to be the person who can wear 3 different hats if needed. Step 3, build your networks before you need them. Connect locally and globally. And step 4, maintain absolute financial discipline. Avoid borrowing if you can, and build up that cash reserve so you have your own personal safety net.
And hey, if you want the secret to becoming indispensable when the layoff rumors start flying, consider what this survey respondent said. The type of employee that managers will want to protect first is the one who not only adds value to the work, but also boosts the morale of the team. Adding value, that's just the baseline. But being highly visible, super flexible, and actually keeping a positive attitude when things are tough, that turns you into the glue holding the team together. You become essential. All right, let's pivot and focus on the modern manager in our 5th and final section, leading through the downturn. How do you lead with empathy and keep a long-term vision when your budget is literally shrinking by the minute? Well, when it comes to managing workforce costs, the biggest, most common mistake is panic firing highly skilled workers just to immediately slice down payroll. It is incredibly short-sighted. The study contrasts this with a much more proactive strategy that we've seen in some European companies. Basically, shifting highly trained staff to flexible or part-time arrangements. You save the jobs, you keep your best talent in-house, and bonus, when the economy eventually bounces back, you aren't spending an absolute fortune trying to rehire and retrain a whole new team. But to make that kind of agility actually work, managers have got to be radically transparent. You have to map out clear crisis scenarios and talk about them openly with your team. Layoffs should truly, strictly be a last resort. Because when you fight to protect your people, you maintain their trust. And let me tell you, trust is the absolute ultimate currency during any economic crisis. Let's move to the macro level and see how this builds into broader organizational survival tactics. The greatest companies actually use recessions as massive opportunities to reinvent themselves. They diversify their revenue streams so they aren't totally reliant on domestic demand. They tap into regional trade. They invest heavily in automation and AI to squeeze out more efficiency. They expand their digital footprints, and they engage with agile, local startup ecosystems. Basically, they don't just turtle up and hide in a shell. They actively pivot. Which brings us to our final and maybe most important thought for this explainer. Are you reacting to the economy, or are you preparing for it? The data from this Turkish stress test absolutely proves that fear and short-term panic are your worst enemies. But by leaning into continuous learning, strict financial discipline, empathetic leadership, and strategic flexibility, you can do so much more than just survive the next downturn. You can literally position yourself to thrive in the middle of it. So stop acting out of fear, start applying these strategies, and safeguard your future today.